And kind of clue us in here a little
Yes.
bit. We know in the agenda packet we got the information, but we'll turn it over to you.
Start with this.
All right, thank you.
And we only have the one item this evening for the work session, and that's proposed changes to the city's farm animal ordinance, which is section 1-17 of the zoning ordinance.
Thank you, Howard.
All right, so good evening, everybody. As Liz said, we begin with our one and only item, the proposed amendment to the city farm animal ordinance. So I'll begin with some background. As Debbie said, keeping of farm animals is allowed in residential areas as per section 1-17 of our zoning ordinance. This proposed change came about in November 2016 when there was first discussion on adding exceptions for miniature animals, miniature horses to be exact, to our current farm animal ordinance. At this time, we also had citizens' interest in keeping pygmy goats, as well as in beekeeping. And while we were preparing this ordinance change, we had some input from city staff regarding reinspection fees and our reinspection process for farm animals. And finally, in the last couple of months, we've had a number of citizens' complaints regarding chickens and roosters. So we combined these together into a proposed farm animal ordinance change and presented it to City Council at their March 27th work session. The council was generally supportive of the changes. However, they raised 2 points. One is that they wish to include an exception to any regulations, any prohibitions for Poquoson's working farms. And also there was concern about how to enforce compliance and address complaints in regarding farm animal permits in neighborhoods without homeowners associations. Finally, there was some discussion after the council work session that we would not move forward with beekeeping language in the ordinance. However, that was later changed at a later date. So we will be presenting that beekeeping language for your consideration in this work session. So in preparing this, we did do some research. Some of the language and the numbers that are included in the proposed ordinance comes from research done with various humane societies, local horse farms, and hobbyist websites. We did research the animal and livestock ordinance for surrounding localities on the peninsula. And on February 1st, we did take a trip, Sherry Coffee and I, to Bluebird Gap Farm, and that's where the pictures you see on this slide are from. The picture on the bottom right gives an indication as to the size of a miniature horse. As you can see, it is a rather small animal. It's about 200 pounds. It's the size of a large dog, and as such, it really does not need the space requirements of a regular-sized horse. So these are the proposed changes. One is to add less strict provisions for the keeping of miniature hooved animals. Currently, our farm animal ordinance allows you to have a horse in the city of Poquoson. However, you need at least 1 acre of fenced-in space per animal. We would like to include a provision in the ordinance allowing for someone to keep a miniature with significantly less space requirements. There is also an added space requirement for the keeping of fowl, as well as a prohibition of roosters that is proposed. There are some modified re-permitting procedures, and finally there is the provision for beekeeping, which we have re-added since the City Council work session. Although the language of that it can be subject to change. So I'll begin with the first proposed change, going in the order they are proposed in the ordinance. So the provision for miniature hooved animals. So this applies to pygmy or miniature hooved animals, excluding pigs as recognized by breed, which are raised and kept outdoors or within accessory structures. So the language from this is mostly derived from our existing ordinance regarding full-size hooved animals. Miniatures must be maintained in yards with enclosed perimeter fences. Those yard areas must meet a 10-foot property line setback. And stables adequate as to the size and condition of the animals must be provided. Up to 2 of these miniature animals are allowed as per this proposal. If someone wants to keep 3 or more of these miniature pygmy animals, they would have to meet the space requirements of our regular hooved animal ordinance. So they would need 1 acre of space per animal. But the yard area requirements for this section, we would propose 1,000 square feet for any horse or other equine, and 250 square feet of space for any goat or sheep. Next section on keeping of chickens or fowl, we have added a minimum requirement of 4 square feet of space per animal for any coop or enclosed structure, and 10 square feet of space for any pen or outdoor yard for the keeping of chickens or fowl. This was a recommended minimum space requirement from a number of farms and humane societies to prevent overcrowding and avoid the spread of disease among the animals. Finally, we have included in this proposal a prohibition on roosters. No roosters would be allowed to be kept in the city, with 2 exceptions. One is that existing roosters in Poquoson would be allowed to remain here for the rest of their natural lives. However, no new roosters would be allowed to be permitted in the city. The second is an exception included as per City Council's directives for estates of 10 or more acres where agriculture is in practice, and this allows Poquoson's working farmlands to have roosters on their land. For permitting requirements, we are adding in a $15 reinspection fee for farm animal permit renewals. Currently, there is a $15 fee for each new farm animal permit. Those permits are inspected and renewed yearly, currently at no cost. We would like to add a fee for that renewal. However, it would only be applied if the number of animals in question has increased. So if someone had a permit for 4 chickens and that number did not increase, then we would simply reinspect and reissue the permit without a fee. If they increase that number, we would charge them a reinspection and repermitting fee. This is meant to cover the costs of reinspection and the notification of adjacent property owners that accompanies these yearly renewals. We would also make it so that the notification of adjacents would only be applied along with the fee. So if there is no change in the number of animals, we would simply inspect it and reissue the permit. We would not put up the fee, and we would not re-notify adjacents. Finally, the language on beekeeping that we had proposed to City Council. So we would like to allow beekeeping explicitly in our ordinance as an item without a permit. These were the requirements we posed to City Council. Hives must be 50 feet from any dwelling, school, or church. Owners must provide a nearby source of water. There is a 10-foot property line setback for beehives, and beekeepers must notify Public Works of their hives. Now, this is because Poquoson conducts annual mosquito spraying, and that spraying can be very harmful to bees, so we would like the opportunity to notify any beekeepers in the city in order for them to protect their hives. Now, there are some possible alternatives to this language. We did receive some public comments saying that the proposed language might be a little bit too stringent or too inconsiderate to our existing beekeepers. The proposal would be to remove the 50-foot space requirement, as it is slightly excessive, especially considering the number of smaller residential lots in Poquoson. However, to keep the 10-foot property line setback for beehives. Another is to include solid fencing around 6 feet in height, separating human beehives from human trafficked areas. This is something that is commonly practiced and is actually in the City of Chesapeake's beekeeping ordinance, that if you put up fences around beehives, the bees are forced to travel upwards and thus out of the areas of human habitation. So those are the end of the proposed changes. At the end, I'll just bring up 2 additional points that came up in discussion for consideration by the Planning Commission. One was that if there is a need for the creation of a formal process or system for addressing farm animal complaints. Currently, we do not have any formal process for doing this. We receive farm animal complaints, and we try and work with the complainant and with the person who is in violation to try and come up with some sort of way to address the issue. But there is no formal process for doing that. So, given the presence of farm animal complaints, do you think it would be necessary to implement some sort of process or review system in order to process these complaints and determine whether or not a person is allowed to have these existing farm animal permits? Secondly, if there is an alternative, more flexible way to allow for miniature animals without being excessively vague or difficult to enforce. Coming up with the square footage requirements for open space for these miniatures was a very difficult process. There are not a lot of clear standards for these animals. They're relatively new development. Their popularity is relatively new, so you get different estimates on how much space is needed depending on who you ask. So just in consideration, if there is any ideas on how to word this so that maybe there's not a specific number or that's something that could be allowed for different types of miniature animals without being too difficult to enforce or too vague. That is the end of the presentation, and so I'll open it up for any questions or comments.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have any questions of Dan and right off before he takes a seat?
Yeah, Dan, and I have a question. I'm just curious, how many current working farms do we have in Poquoson? Do you have
We
any?
have 2 working farms. The one is around 18 acres and the other is about 12 and a half acres. They are off With Creek Road around, I believe, Freeman Lane and Ashland Farm Lane. So they're in the bottom eastern half of the city.
So my understanding is that they would be grandfathered in, they would not have to comply, is that my understanding?
Yes, there is a provision. The provision for roosters, we would not apply it to them, as those properties would be exempted from that.
And my other question is, if an individual wanted to mix miniatures and regular-sized animals, how is that square footage or acreage calibrated?
The current interpretation, we would probably keep them separate and simply just add it together. So if someone wanted to have a horse, they would need 1 acre of land. If someone wanted to have miniatures, they would need additionally 1,000 or 2,000 acres of space. Generally, from my research, it's not really a good idea to mix these animals together in the same fenced pasture area, so we'd probably suggest that they keep them separate.
Dannon, what drove the changes for the chicken space requirements? Were there complaints for the chickens?
Historically, I believe there have been complaints about sanitary conditions and overcrowding with the keeping of chickens in the city. So this is our way to try and address this without being imposing a strict limit, like localities like Newport News and Hampton have a strict limit of 4 or 6 chickens and that's it. So this is our way of trying to address that in a more reasonable manner.
And then relating to that, depending on how you keep your chickens, so if you have, say, 8 chickens and they're mostly free range during the day, but then they go into a coop to sleep, so they would still need, although they're free range during the day, they would still need that 4 square feet per bird just for sleeping? Or if they're mostly free range, would they be able to waive that 4 square feet per bird for the coop if they're just going in there to sleep?
That could be possible. That's definitely something we could look at. Yeah, I profess my ignorance as to chicken keeping, so I'm not really sure how it works when it comes to indoor and outdoor space, but yeah, we could definitely take a look at that.
At one time, we had a lot of discussion over chickens a few years ago, because we had one person that had, I believe it was close to 100 or maybe a few more than 100 chickens. And so the neighbors next to that person were not particularly happy, because that's a lot of chickens. And so we had a lot of discussion about chickens at that time. And I didn't know that we had, of course, the roosters now probably, maybe some of the discussion, it sounds like they're like crowing a lot. Yes, they can do that. So trying to eliminate that, they're probably waking people up.
The difference between this particular ordinance and what we tried to approach the last time is the last provision, when we made the changes, we were trying to establish a limit per residential lot, and it drew a lot of opposition. So that's the reason why no changes were ever made. In this particular provision, we're not suggesting that there be a maximum number, but just simply a more humane way of keeping the animals on the property.
You're on.
I'm on, okay. I was interested because of the two things you called attention to in the write-up regarding animal permits and the challenge of specifying square footage requirements. So with just about half an hour or so of looking on the various websites for these small horses, I walked away from that very brief review thinking that you've probably dramatically understated the space requirements for these animals. If you just look at what you have now for a horse, which is an acre, and you take 1,000 feet for a small horse, that's like 1/43rd of the space required for the small horse that you've got for a full-size horse. And it's not linear. I mean, these things still require space. Couple of these websites both of them made big points of saying, even if you have an enclosed area for them, it's recommended you keep part of it for pasture, letting them eat grass, and a part of it for them to not eat while they're moving them back and forth. And it just struck me as being overly constrained. There are animals, and if you have these small areas, you're still going to have a requirement to bring in food, because you're not going to grow enough grass or stuff on your property to do that. So, I mean, I prefaced what I said with my level of expertise, which is practically zero. But I think that you called attention to it, and I took it in good faith, and I think it's an issue. I don't think that this is even in the ballpark. And I have a question about the fencing. There's nothing in here that says where on the property this enclosure would be. If you go into a housing area that's development, but it's not governed by a homeowners association, you can come into a development and find these things in the front yard. Is that what the community wants? Just opening the question.
I think that's a valid question. We had some discussion of that, I think, before, but them being in the front yard and the rotation of them from one place to another, they have to be rotated, I think, in timely fashion. I'm not familiar too much with it either, even though, as I said before, I had chickens at one time, but it's become keeping chickens now has become so much more complicated than it used to be. But we would have never put them in the front yard years ago. I don't remember anybody really wanting them in the front yard, but now I think there was some discussion of that because they have to rotate them around. And I have seen people put them in the front yard, which to me I found strange, but I guess they know more about the science of raising chickens than I do. But that's kind of I think that's a valid question, because unless there is a homeowners association, that could probably pose a problem. Some people would not want to live next door to somebody with chickens in the front yard. So I guess that's something to take into consideration, Debbie.
Okay.
A question that, might be certainly. And then the pygmy horses, that's something where I don't think I'm certainly not familiar with them at all. Have no experience with them, don't know how much they require or anything, so that you would have to sort of go by some of the other localities, I would think, because we haven't had any experience with that.
Right.
And if they weigh, you say up to 200 pounds, that's sort of a big, big dog. I don't know. I would think they would have to have a pretty good area, but I'm certainly not knowledgeable in that field. I can't really raise a question on that.
To your point, the government not really understanding what it needs to understand to take care of these things. And to your point, in your paper here about how to better state what requirements frame the ability to bring these animals on board, you might want to consider, you've got X number of species of animals you're going to allow in here, whatever it happens to be. But regardless what that species is, there's probably one or multiple professional associations out there that circumscribe what proper care of these animals means. And I think that language to the effect that if you're going to have a shrunken horse, you have to adhere to the standards of the Shrunken Horse Society to keep that horse. And then just, there's a way to say that very efficiently, I think. And same with goats and pet snakes or whatever.
Now, when you went to Bluebird Gap Farm, they do have a pygmy
Yes.
horse there. And they gave you some guidelines as to what they do?
They
or-
generally keep all their animals on areas from around 1/10 to 1/4 of an acre. But I have seen estimates from 1,000 or 2,000 feet up to, half an acre for these kinds of animals. So it's difficult to get a clear
Yeah,
number.
that's the kind of the feeling I'm getting too. It's kind of difficult to say.
So the closest, obviously with the bees, we have the colonial beekeepers, and the chickens, we have the peninsula chicken keepers. And in my research, I was trying to think of who I could call to get any feedback on these miniature farm animals. And the closest thing I could think of was a local 4-H extension, the York Poquoson 4-H. So I did put in a call to them, and they were going to try to get me a good contact and get someone call me back to see if there was anybody that I could ask questions regarding miniature livestock.
Well, I think there was someone over in Smithfield or someone over that way that used to raise them. And I don't know, they had a big place over there, as I recall. I remember seeing them. But I don't know, I think you're probably right. There are certainly organizations that we could find, that could be found online regarding them. I mean, just like anything that you have nowadays is pretty accessible. So, but that would be, you'd have to pursue that a little bit, I think, to come up with exactly. Because I would say localities probably, this is sort of something that, not a whole lot of people are going to have.
Right.
You probably just need something, because eventually you're going to have somebody that is going to have these types of animals, but probably difficult to gauge it from other localities. Although you probably, if you did go to the more rural areas such as Isle of Wight and those areas, it may be some in those areas that they would have you check those,
Right.
the more rural areas.
We could definitely check on those to see if there's any
Yeah.
outstanding.
That's what I would, think. I don't know, do we have any more discussion as to, what about the bees? I mean, we talked about the bees a little bit.
I have
Oh,
one.
it's 7:00 too, I guess we better speak kind of quickly.
I just have one comment regarding the bees. I know that York County has the beehives need to be past the 50 feet from any dwelling. There were some residents that would interpret that differently. Some would interpret that, well, they can be adjacent to to the owner's dwelling, but just neighbors' dwellings, they had to be 50 feet away. So if that's verbiage, if they can be adjacent to the homeowners or the owner's dwelling versus neighboring dwellings.
Okay.
When do citizens get to comment?
Not in the work session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Excuse me, we do have, in our regular
Mm-hmm.
session, there is a section under
Okay.
audience for
After
visitors.
7?
Yes.
Yeah, when we open the meeting, we'll give you an audience for visitor and this, so there isn't. Okay, well, do you think, we probably haven't given you too much to go on, have we? We've asked a few
It's a
questions,
work in progress, so.
but it's sort of a work in progress,
Yes.
exactly. That's sort of the way, and we've maybe brought up a few points that, we're kind of a little bit.
Well, I
interested
think
in.
they're
What
all
do you
good
think?
points, and I think it gives us some direction of where we need to go at this point. And we have some understanding as to what the planning commission, what your perception is of the proposed changes. And at this particular time, I would just suggest, it's not something that we're trying to rush through the process. So give staff an opportunity to go back and kind of look at the comments that we've received this evening and see if additional changes are needed, and we make those changes, and then we'll seek the guidance of our executive office to determine when they're ready to take it to city council, because we may want to bring it back to the planning commission for additional discussion in a work session before we move it on to city council. So as Dan said, this is like a work in progress, and so we have no definitive time for moving forward with it. So we'll just kind of take our time and look at it very closely and see.
Sounds good.
But we do appreciate the comments that we've received this evening. They were very good comments. We
All right.
appreciate that.
Okay, with that, I guess if there's nothing else on this, probably we should go ahead and move on to our meeting, since we're running right close to 7. We're not too far over.
anticipate that that will be moving forward through the process here, either for your May meeting or maybe the June meeting. And we are also working on a couple of other conditional use permit applications that are just hanging out there. And I really don't want to mention them at this point because we haven't had much contact with the applicants since we have first advised them that they needed to go through this process. But it's very possible that we might be receiving something shortly on those as well. As an extension of your action tonight on Karen, I would like to point out that Karen used to do our videoing in the AV room, and Sherry Coffey from our office, she has stepped up. She is in there this evening, and I'm sure she's doing a great job, but I did want to recognize that she is working with us, and she will probably be here most of the time. We're trying to kind of spread this out a little bit and throughout our department because it's a huge undertaking, especially with Vicky's absence. You know, she just did things so seamlessly that we just didn't realize that a lot of it was going on. So please bear with us. I know it's not quite as great as it was when Vicky was here, but we're going to get up to speed and try to make things as great again. But I don't know that we could ever fill Vicky's shoes. I really do miss her. So, but anyway, that's all I have this evening.
All right, thank you, Debbie. Dannon, did you have to let
Not at
us
this
know?
time, just-
Okay,
Thank you for
all right, thank you. Okay, just to mention, of course, referring to, the fact that we have quite a bit of new. I wanted to mention that we have lost Rich Clifton, and tonight we had John Smith, who's our newest member, and welcome, John. Officially, you're a member, and we're glad to have you.
Thank you.
We appreciate your service. We appreciate Rich and miss him. He was a real great member, and we're sorry that he had to leave, but his work carried him away, and we understand that. That happens sometimes. Also, we have not had a meeting since Angie Emmett she is our next to the newest member. This is her first meeting tonight, and we welcome you too, Angie. You've been working on the comp plan, though, so you kind of feel like you've jumped in, got your feet wet anyway. And of course, Karen is going to be here to help us whenever we need help now, and she's going to do a great job. And thank you, Sherry, too, for stepping up to the filming. She'll do that. She knows how to do that, too. So I feel like we're going to be fine. Dannon is our new planner, too, so we welcome him. We've really had a lot of change, haven't we? Good. We almost had another change. This fellow over here next to me, Mr. Travis, has decided to stay on a little while longer, and I am very appreciative of that. Since we are in somewhat of a transitional period, I feel like it's a good thing to have some people who are familiar with just the workings of the Planning Commission. I think it will bring some continuity. Change is good, but we do need some continuity. And with our group, we've always seemed to have a good mix. Forward to having new members and having a few stick around just to kind of lend a hand every now and then. So with that, I think we can adjourn the meeting usually at the end, since we haven't met since August, I'm a little rusty on conducting a meeting. I had to get up to speed tonight, but usually we do have a little thing at the end before we adjourn. Mr. Smith, you're on the end, so I'm going to ask you to go first tonight. We just say if you have something you would like to say, you're welcome to, and if you don't, you can just say, no, thank you, I have nothing to say, and pass over to Ann. All right, thank you, Mr. Smith. And Angie?
Just really quickly, I am horrified that I neglected to mention the staff on the CPT report because they have spent so many late meetings with us, and thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Lee?
Yes, I would just like the minutes to reflect a thank you to Vicki Diggs for her honorable service to this Planning Commission. I think we all are seeing a gap and her not being available, but I just want to say from a personal standpoint what a help she was to me as commissioner, and it was certainly very responsive in communications. And as a sidebar to that, I did attend the 16-week training session offered by Virginia Tech for planning commissioners training, and Vicki was instrumental in doing the reservations, and I just found that the whole series extremely helpful, and I would highly recommend it for commissioners.
Bill?
Slightly belated happy holiday, and to both Karen and John, welcome aboard. Not as bad as some people may have told you.
All right. Well, again, I'm going to say like Lee, personally, Vicki I can't even begin to express my appreciation to her. Vicki has been a friend of mine since we were in elementary school. I've known her for we've known each other, I guess, just about all our lives, and she is one of the nicest people that I know, and completely organized and just so knowledgeable, and I just want to thank her. Just from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank her and wish her the very best. She deserves just a wonderful retirement because she's worked so diligently to make things run smoothly, and she's just well deserving. But we will certainly miss her. But she needs a little break and needs some time to enjoy her life and have a good time. Wish her the best. All right, and with that said, now I think if nobody else got anything, we'll just go ahead and adjourn this meeting and thank everybody for coming, and we'll see you next month. We'll be seeing you probably before the meeting so we can have a work session. Y'all set that up and we'll be there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.